I'm very excited to introduce Marcia Reid Fotheringham, who is joining me today to talk about a special conference that she was a part of on Thursday through Multicultural Cumbria, but also to sort of share her insights and feelings about the fact that it's Black History Month and also that we had World Mental Health Day on Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'd love to hear sort of the basis of what your talk was on Thursday.
My talk, first of all, it was the Multicultural Cumbria Conference, Race to Be. It's the second year of their conference. I did speak last year and I had the pleasure of being asked and did speak this year, so Thursday. The first part of the conference, I would say, were personal stories, very personal stories about people and their own existence and possibly their own, at times, battle. So whether it was a refugee or a person of color talking about what their life has been, all of them were Cumbrian, meaning they live in Cumbria. And then by the afternoon, we got a little bit more specific. An ER doctor spoke about his experience in the NHS, and his line was very simple. We all need to talk together, generally. After that, there was a businessman from the Cockermouth area. He spoke a lot about his own business, and also because he is a person of color, he spent some time talking about his past hesitance to talk about color and race in general. He's clearly starting to do it now, which I think is just fantastic. And if anything, my hope is to encourage him to do more. He's got a lot to say. And because he is a boss of a business, he's in the unusual position for a Black man or for a man of color of being able to set the tone in his business around race. He is the example, his business is the example of why we need people of color in leadership places. The way he works out policies and procedures is different. It's more inclusive. So instead of it being top down, he's busy trying to get people in to give him the ideas about what really works in business for his employee. It's very caring. And then there was me talking a bit about, or a lot about actually, Black History Month in general, and also equity versus equality. In reference to Black History Month in general, it's clear to me that people in general here, I mean the UK, are very happy speaking about Black issues during Black History Month. TV, radio, movies, they're all out showing many people of difference, which is a wonderful thing. My problem is that if it's not Black History Month, generally what I would get as a speaker is a lot of rolled eyes and a lot of people saying things like, I think we've talked about this enough. We don't need to talk about it anymore. This is an over and done with issue, when of course it's not. So often I feel as if I'm going against the tide, but it's well worth going against the tide. So that was in reference to Black History Month and the need for Black History Month to continue, in that nobody knows enough about Black history, and it's not included in the curriculum, which it should be, and many people just don't want to talk about it. My second big thing, which I interwove, was the business that most companies now have equality policies, equality statements. They have EDI departments in almost every business. But I find they can say they are equal, but I've realized that's not the equality that we want. So I spent some time talking about equity, because that is what we want. Now, the difference between the two, equality says we all get the same thing, and they want to make sure we all have access to exactly the same thing. Equity says we get what we need to succeed, which is very different. And because so many people will then say to me, so you think Black people should be given, or people of color should be given some special circumstances? I say yes, yes. And explain to them that is what we've done when women joined the workforce. Work hours changed, the notion of being flexible with work hours, part-time changed, and now we're busy talking about including menopause and the impact of menopause on the workplace. So that's very nice, but that's equity. Mm-hmm. I use the example through the pandemic when it came to laptops and making sure students had access to laptops. If it was done equally, the same number of laptops would be given to all the same schools, meaning every school would get 10, for example. Mm-hmm. But that's not the way it went. They did it based on equity, based on the need in that given school, which is a much fairer system. And it brings justice to those who don't have justice. So for me now, I feel the next wave of work for people of color, and that means for me, is to make sure I'm talking about equity. I want equity in our workplace. Equity also means that instead of it being a top-down run business, it must be a business that includes people who are actually going to be the recipient of whatever that policy or procedure is. They should be involved in the making of that. Now, nowadays, especially because we all have EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusivity directors, I find that's very nice, but they don't do the job. So I want to see people do the job properly. For most businesses, it does mean that they have to learn how to embed equity into their business. So I can tell you that I only know of one company, the company you heard me talk about a little while ago. They're the only company I know that does that in Cumbria. We need more people in Cumbria to do it.
Well, one of the things I loved about the conference is that although there was a wide variety of speakers, you had people who were clearly experts in their field, whether it was education or healthcare. And you also had these stories, like you say, of the business owner. You have sort of you're tied into the very fabric of the community. I mean, starting with working in mental health, being sort of a patron and being involved with lots of community groups, and also being the High Sheriff of Cumbria for 2019-2020. So very much a part of the community. And one of the things that you've talked about is that finding the thing that's important to you and then speaking about it, and whether it's one person or 500 people. But the thing that really struck out to me as someone who is constantly trying to sort of be a part of making the community better is finding that way to do it that feels comfortable and right for you, and to practice. I love what you said last year was to find someone you trust and sort of have that conversation and practice having that conversation. Do you feel like within this past year, and you've talked to a lot of people, do you see that in action, that sort of finding the courage to speak out?
Yes and no. I think there are true areas where you can have the conversation. I know that there are people around me who I do interact with, who years ago would never have had this conversation with me. They are clearly more comfortable. Sometimes it starts with a negative. My job is to turn that into a positive. What I mean by that is when somebody says to me, "You're not going to talk about race again, are you?" Which clearly is not so positive. My job is to turn that around as I say, "Oh yeah, we are going to talk a bit about race, but we're also going to talk about you and the community and what's going on and our children, because they're all really part of that. And it's important to include them as we have a conversation about them, about us, about the way we are and the way we live."
That's quite a nice idea, as making sure that the children are sort of adjacent to the conversation, are part of the conversation, and modeling higher level thinking skills, really analyzing your relationships and the way that you sort of see the world, but also modeling, maybe not getting it quite right, but always trying and always listening. And that's a great opportunity for young people.
I think you've hit it on the ball. It's trying. It's a matter of continuing to try. Remember, we all get things wrong. So the fact that it may have been said in an incorrect way, or it may not have sounded, when you hear your voice, it may not have sounded quite the way you wanted it to sound, doesn't matter. What does matter is that you're engaged in the conversation. If you're with most people who care, they understand that you don't have to get it right. It's really just a matter of continuing what really has already started, which is a bit of a dialogue. It's the conversation that we really need to keep going with. And it's a conversation that I often say, while it needs to be held with the right person, you can have conversations with the wrong person and still learn. So no matter what the format or the forum, there's always something good that can come of it, even if it starts in a less than positive way. And the children obviously is so important. We have an obligation and a duty to really help our kids make sense of what really is quite a crazy world.
Well, that leads us on to the next bit. So Sunday was World Mental Health Day, and there are some very obvious intersections between the way we feel about our communities, the way we feel about belonging, and experiences of racism, but also trying to build community cohesion and sort of mental health, whether it's sort of a personal, how do I deal with these feelings, or sort of a community. Do you have experience as a mental health professional? Do you feel that those needs are actually being met as we stand right now with what we have in mental health services, but also community support?
No, certainly not. They're not being met. You know what they are, though, is they are being talked about. That is the beginning, I think, of change. From my personal experience, I worked as a psychologist in the NHS after moving here for 10 years. A really hard 10 years, because at that point, I really felt the stigma around mental health was alive and kicking. It was really hard for people to walk through the door. And as an experienced clinician, my frustration had been that I was used to the American system where, everybody has a therapist and everybody embraces their therapist and talks about the fact that they have a therapist. Here, it's very closed. It's not talked about. People don't want to acknowledge it. Now, in the time I've been here, that has changed. And that's a wonderful thing that it has changed. Has it changed enough? No. Wait lists are way too long. The kind of work we're doing is way too short. If anything, we've got to put much, 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 much more into the mental health treatment options that we provide people. I know it's expensive. I know it takes time, but we do it for our cars. And if we can do it for our cars, we should be able to do it for ourselves. And by that, I mean, we give our cars an MOT. Whether it needs it or not, we just know time-wise, it's supposed to go in there. For mental health, I want everybody to know that no matter who you are, no matter what life you're living, we all need a little support at times. That support is really important to get when you're ready. Nowadays, I get to hear of too many problems with people who are suffering. They've made what they think is a huge step, and they've contacted their doctor, and then they're told they have to wait. Yeah. So, no, there's not enough. There needs to be much, much more, even though every mental health day needs to be celebrated.
Thank you so much for joining me. I could honestly quite talk to you for 2 hours or more. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the work that you do and for being on the show today.
May, I'm only continuing because I have an unusual luxury. Cumbria has been very good to me. If every Black person or person of color was treated the way I'm treated, we would not have a problem. So it's my joy to speak to people and to tell them, I want more people to have my experience. And by that, I mean nice acceptance from people around. So it's my joy to be able to say, this is what I expect. This is what we should be doing for everybody. And bit by bit, if I can help that bit happen, I'm doing my job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, May.